Mr. President, I'm a big Boston Red Sox fan, and one of the most famous players in Red Sox recent history is Manny Ramirez. Manny Ramirez was a good baseball player, but he had a habit of doing some pretty ridiculous things on the field and off the field that were really detrimental to the team. Some really bizarre on-field behavior, cutting off throws from other outfielders before they got to the infield, bizarre off-the-field behavior that disrupted the team. It became so regular that a phrase was adopted amongst the Red Sox fans: that's just Manny being Manny. And over the years, it just was accepted that every year Manny Ramirez was going to do a whole bunch of stuff that was really detrimental to the team. And over time, it just kind of became accepted that that was a fact of life, a way of life with Manny Ramirez. And as time went on, people reacted less hostily. It barely got noticed in some cases when he was engaged in these detrimental forms of conduct. And I tell that story because it stands for, a kind of universal concept. When bad behavior gets normalized, it no longer feels like bad behavior, even if that behavior is hurting people. Today, the world is littered with corrupt governments, governments where the leaders and the really rich men who surround the leaders, the oligarchs, they steal from people. That's what they do. The leaders and the leaders' friends just keep a hand constantly in the government treasury, and they steal taxpayer dollars. They rig the rules of the economy in order to make themselves fabulously rich. They hurt the citizens of those countries. Vladimir Putin, for instance, has never had a job outside of government, but he's reportedly worth $200 billion. One of his many houses cost $1.4 billion to build. Supposedly, the landscaping costs on an annual basis for that house are $2 million alone. That $1.4 billion house was paid for by money he stole from the Russian treasury. In other words, he stole it from the Russian people. Putin and his friends have been doing it for so long and doing it so openly and brazenly. Putin, for instance, wears a watch that retails for $500,000, for $500,000, even though his official salary is only $140,000. They've been doing this so openly and brazenly, they're so public in their corruption in Russia, that it's just accepted. It's just mainstream, the fact that Putin and his cronies steal from the Russian people. That's what's happening in America today. And it's heartbreaking for me to say this. But in the first 6 months of the Trump presidency, Trump and Elon Musk and their billionaire friends have engaged in a stunning rampage of open public corruption. It's not fundamentally different than what happened in Russia. These are efforts to steal from the American people to enrich themselves. And their strategy is to do it all out in the open, to do it at such a dizzying pace that the country just gets overwhelmed or anesthetized or dulled into a sense that we just all have to accept the corruption, or maybe more charitably, that this is just how government works, that government is just corrupt, and so the fact that it's happening out in the open instead of happening secretly, well, it's really nothing new. But this is not how government works. The things that have happened over the last 6 weeks are unprecedented. The president and his billionaire friends are not supposed to steal from us. They are not supposed to use their power and their access to power, their access to government levers, to rig the rules to enrich themselves. That has always been wrong. It is still wrong, and we do not have to accept this. And so in the next few minutes, I want to try out an exercise. I want to try to lay out for you, as quickly as I can, just some of the most significant instances of blatantly corrupt activity that's happened in just the first 6 weeks of Trump's presidency. When you see it all together, there is no way to avoid a simple conclusion. This White House is on its way to being the most corrupt in the history of the country. And just because they are doing it out in the open for everybody to see doesn't mean that it's not corrupt. And my hope is that if you see it all in one place, the gravity of this moment may hit you. My hope is that my colleagues and the public choose not to normalize a president or his advisors using the Oval Office as a blunt mechanism to make themselves even wealthier. It is our decision to have zero tolerance for corruption. It's also our decision to just decide to become a place like Russia, where our leaders are allowed to routinely steal from us. So this is a heartbreakingly long list. This is just 20 or so examples of corrupt behavior in the first 6 weeks of the Trump presidency. So here it goes. We're going to start on January 17th. On January 17th, Trump launches the meme coin. This is maybe the most corrupt of all the acts, because what is the meme coin? The meme coin is essentially a mechanism by which Russian oligarchs or corporate CEOs can literally send money privately directly to Donald Trump. Nobody knows who buys the meme coin, but Trump makes money when people buy it. And so it is just an open sewer valve that allows for anybody who is trying to influence the Trump administration to be able to secretly funnel money to Donald Trump. He reserves 80% of the coin. He waits to release that coin until the price jumps back up again, which essentially means he's waiting for people who want favors from him to buy a bunch of the coin to inflate the value so that he releases more and makes more money. It's a disgusting kind of corruption, because this is essentially Trump just posting his Venmo for anybody secretly to wire him as much money as they want. We've never seen something like this before, where anybody who has anything to gain from the Trump administration through a manipulation of the value of Trump's meme coin can funnel money directly to the president, whisper in his ear, "That was me. That was me that purchased all that coin, that jumped up the value, that allowed you to release new coin. Hey, take care of me on the back end." On January 20th, when he's sworn in, he institutes his new energy agenda. Now, open reporting suggested that during the campaign, he met with the oil and gas industry, and they cut a deal in which the oil and gas industry would give him $1 billion of campaign contributions in order to receive favorable treatment when Trump was sworn in. And guess what happens on January 20th? Trump unveils his energy strategy. And what does it do? It preferences oil and gas, and it punishes oil and gas's competitors. It, for instance, freezes all permits on wind projects, both for the land and the sea. It undercuts permitting processes, not for oil and gas, but for oil and gas's competitors. Oil and gas got exactly what they asked for. They gave a campaign contribution, and they got the favorable treatment. 5 days later, Trump fires 17 inspectors general. What do inspectors general do? They look for corruption inside of these agencies. What do? If you are trying to engage in corruption, if you are trying to steal from the American people, you fire the inspectors general. 2 days later, on January 27th, Trump fires Gwynne Wilcox from the NLRB. This is the National Labor Relations Board. When she's fired, the National Labor Relations Board cannot function any longer. Why does this matter? Because the person that has been put in charge of reviewing the hirings and firings of these agencies is Elon Musk, who, by the way, has lots of cases before the NLRB. So do the people that are standing behind Trump during the inauguration. Almost all of them have active cases before the NLRB. The billionaires supporting Donald Trump now don't have to worry about the NLRB, because on January 27th, the NLRB is rendered powerlessness. 3 days later, on January 30th, Trump awards more than $800,000 worth of stock to several of the board members of the Trump Media and Technology Group. This is the publicly traded company behind his social media platforms. So now his cabinet members, people like Kash Patel and Linda McMahon, are owning equity in Trump's media platform, equity that can be cashed out, sold to people who want to buy them out of their interest at any time. Those people who might want to buy them out, cabinet members, could be individuals with issues before the Department of Education, before the FBI. Yet another avenue in which people who have influence, who want to gain influence inside the Trump administration, have a conduit to be able to move cash from their pocketbooks, from their treasury, from their bank accounts, into the bank accounts of Trump cabinet members. Shortly thereafter, we start to see the weaponization of the DOJ. On February 23rd, a civil complaint from DOJ that had been pending against SpaceX, Elon Musk's signature company, is dropped. 8 days later, the DOJ drops a case against a Republican congressman. On February 19th, 2 or 3 weeks later, the DOJ opens up something called Operation Whirlwind, which seeks to target anyone who dares try to obstruct or criticize the work of Elon Musk and Doge. Over the course of the first few weeks, the DOJ is turned into an entity that drops cases against those who are loyal to Donald Trump and pursues aggressively investigations against those who are trying to criticize Donald Trump. On February 1st, Trump fires the director of the CFPB and announces plans to shutter the Consumer Financial Protection Board. Again, very much like the NLRB, this is an agency that was, at the moment that it was rendered powerless, investigating Elon Musk and many of the biggest financial backers of Donald Trump. So once again, those that have access to Donald Trump, the billionaires that are close to him, now don't have to worry about labor violations being investigated by the NLRB. Now they don't have to worry about consumer protection actions being taken against them by the CFPB. On February 4th, there is the first of 2 extraordinary meetings in the White House in which Donald Trump convenes his business partners, the Saudi Golf League and the PGA, to try to negotiate a solution to the dispute between those 2 golf leagues. Why? Because Trump has a business interest in that dispute being resolved. The Saudi Golf League plays tournaments at Trump's courses in the United States. And so if the White House, using its official power, can try to negotiate a settlement between those 2 groups, Trump stands to make money. On February 6th, something absolutely stunning happens. Pam Bondi, the AG, issues a memorandum in which she proposes to dull the criminal enforcement of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. If you are representing a foreign government before the United States, you have to register so that we know if you are acting on behalf of American interests or you are acting on behalf of foreign interests. In the prior Trump administration, Trump officials got in big trouble for secretly working for and getting paid by foreign governments without registering. Well, what does Trump announce? That they are going to limit the applicability of the enforcement of that statute, making it much easier for Trump's friends, for his MAGA crowd, for the people who show up to Mar-a-Lago, to get paid quietly by foreign governments in order to influence Donald Trump. On February 10th, maybe aside from the meme coin, the most stunning act of corruption, the Eric Adams quid pro quo, in which Eric Adams, indicted for corruption, is let off the hook. His charges are dismissed in exchange for the mayor's pledge of political loyalty to Donald Trump. They literally went on TV and announced the deal that we're getting rid of the charges against Eric Adams as long as the mayor pledges political loyalty to the president. That was so corrupt that 6 or 7 DOJ officials resigned because they refused to withdraw those charges. But the deal went through because the 7th or the 8th or the 9th official finally filed the withdrawal. And now in America, it is 100% clear that if you want to get away with corruption, if you want to steal from your constituents and you're an elected official in this country, all you have to do is just sign up for political loyalty with Donald Trump, and he will instruct the Department of Justice to let you get away with it. On February 10th, Donald Trump directs the DOJ to pause enforcement of U.S. laws that prohibit companies from paying bribes overseas. Come on. Like, come on. He instructs the DOJ to pause enforcement of U.S. laws that prohibit companies to pay bribes overseas. Here's an example. Goldman Sachs was engaged in outright bribery. They were paying bribes to Malaysian officials so that they could get a contract to manage the resources of the Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund. American companies should not be overseas bribing foreign governments. That compromises America's reputation and America's national security. But now we are going to pause enforcement of the laws that stop American companies from bribing foreign governments because corruption is now being normalized. This is what you do if you want to normalize corruption, is that you make it legal for American companies to engage in corruption overseas. That makes it easier for Trump to get away with corruption here. 2 days later, on February 12th, the announcement comes out that the State Department is going to buy $400 million of armored Teslas. Okay, so now it's getting even more blatant. It's getting even more brazen. The State Department is just going to buy a whole bunch of product from Elon Musk, product that they were not previously scheduled to buy. It is true that the Biden administration had a blueprint that was going to buy some electric vehicles, but it was around $483,000 worth of vehicles. Trump revises that blueprint of spending so that now the federal government is going to spend $400 million on armored Teslas from Elon Musk. Let's see. That's February 12th. That same day, Elon Musk's people infiltrate the Department of Labor. And reporting suggests that during that infiltration, Elon Musk's personal representatives get access to enforcement information at OSHA, not only against Elon Musk's companies, and by the way, SpaceX has an employee injury rate that is 9 times higher than the industry average, but also workplace safety violations against Elon Musk's competitors. Here's the message. If you are close to Donald Trump personally, if you support him politically, you can get secret access to enforcement data against your country, against your companies, and your company's competitors. That's what happens on February 12th. 3 days later, there's some suspicious firings at the FDA, again related to Elon Musk's personal financial interests. Elon Musk owns a medical device company called Neuralink. It is currently being reviewed by the FDA, and guess what? On February 15th and 16th, all over a weekend, there are 20 people fired from the FDA's Office of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices. Fired by DOJ, run by Elon Musk. Clear message. You're going to get fired if you aren't on the right side of Elon Musk's application. Now, whether that was explicit or not, if the guy who is firing you has a pending application before your department, aren't you going to think twice? Aren't you going to think twice about ruling against his interests? This is why this is all unprecedented. Again, this feels normal because it's been happening every day, but never before in American history have we allowed someone who has a pending application for approval of a medicine or a medical device to be able to personally decide who gets hired and who gets fired at the regulatory agency making the decision over that medical device. But now this stuff is happening every day because on February 15th as well, that same weekend, there's an announcement that the FDA cuts are going to be even deeper, perhaps as big as 50%. That means that hundreds of drugs and devices won't get approved at the FDA. And you know who benefits from that? The folks that are selling the snake oil products. And guess who's selling the snake oil products? The people who work for Donald Trump, selling Vita gummy scams, The director of the FBI is selling vaccine reversal pills. When the FDA gets gutted, it's the people who sell those unregulated products who stand to gain. On February 19th, 4 days later, we find out that the IRS is going to be cut by 7,000 people. And the biggest chunk of the folks who are going to be laid off are the people who do the audits of the billionaires and the millionaires and the corporations. And so once again, Elon Musk and the people standing behind Donald Trump on Inauguration Day are going to get off because the IRS just had its enforcement powers, its audit powers, absolutely gutted. That same day, on February 19th, you start to receive word that advertising on Elon Musk's platform is starting to grow again. And the reporting on February 19th indicates that American companies have come to the collective decision that they need to keep advertising on Elon Musk's platform because Elon Musk has so much regulatory power inside the federal government, that they need to make sure that they're paying Musk through Twitter and through X so that if they ultimately need something from the federal government, they can get it. This, again, is why we have never, ever in the history of this country allowed for the richest man in the world, somebody who controls major companies, to also have an official position inside the government. Because of course, it opens up these clear avenues where people are going to do business with him privately to try to curry favor with him publicly. I'm not done. It just keeps going. The next day, on February 20th, the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices monthly meeting is canceled and not rescheduled. And so we were very worried that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who makes money off of his attacks on vaccines, would continue those attacks when he took over HHS. Because if faith in vaccines continues to plummet, it is very likely that RFK Jr. will make money. Why? Because the not-for-profit that he will likely return to, the company that he will return to after he leaves, makes money as vaccine misinformation spreads. And he also continues to collect fees for referring cases to a company that handles claims of personal injury due to vaccines. And so when the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is canceled, it is a clear indication that, yes, this campaign of assault on vaccines is going to continue, which, not surprisingly, is likely to make RFK Jr. even more money. On February 26th, we see Trump's MAGA hats that are for sale on his website displayed in the Oval Office. And it's just a reminder that so many people inside Trump's universe continue to sell merchandise on the side in order to make money. Donald Trump has always done this, and we've just kind of accepted it, even though it is a kind of corruption in and of itself. But Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, is still selling cash-branded merchandise, even while he's going to run the FBI. Elon Musk and others are selling Doge merchandise. So as they trumpet their brand inside the government, they're making money off their brand outside of the government. On February 26th, maybe the third most significant of brazen corruption happens, news breaks that Elon Musk is just going to have the FAA cancel a contract with Verizon that has been in the works for years and instead just substitute in Starlink for Verizon. Just extraordinary that this is happening in plain view of everybody. Elon Musk takes his private company, uses his access to government to just shove out of the way his competitors and instead insert himself and his company. Again, we've never seen this ever before in American history. Now it's happening on a daily basis. And now we get to this week. This week, Wired reports that guests are paying millions of dollars to dine with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and business leaders are being targeted with advertisements that sell access to a one-on-one meeting with the President of the United States for $5 million. Come on. Like, seriously. There's advertisements that say if you're a business CEO and you pay $5 million to Donald Trump, you can get a meeting with him. Like, this isn't okay. And yet, because it happens every single day, they're asking for us to pretend that this is normal. This is just 6 weeks. It's just 6 weeks. And the last thing on the list is an offer to meet with the president for $1 million or $5 million. If any previous president had sent out an advertisement suggesting that you could meet with them for a payment to them of $1 million to $5 million, in and of itself, we would deem that to be unacceptable. But Donald Trump and Elon Musk believe that because they have arranged this dizzying pace of corruption in which not a day goes by in which something doesn't happen inside our government, in which Elon Musk or Donald Trump use their power in order to rig the rules to enrich themselves, that we are all going to feel that it's normal. This is how democracies die. Democracies die when the very powerful people steal from us so regularly, so openly, so unapologetically, that we come to believe that it's normal. And listen, I understand that many Americans may think that all of this stuff just used to happen quietly. And the only difference is that Trump and Musk are just putting it all out in the open. And I'm not saying that there haven't been instances of corruption. Democrats and Republicans in this body have been accused of and convicted of acts of corruption. It has been a fact of life in American politics for a long time. But never before has the corruption happened this openly or this frequently. And so I lay it all out for you this afternoon in the hopes that it is not too late for us to decide to stand up as a body and as a nation to say that this isn't okay. The Trump meme coin is not okay. It's not okay for people who have interests before the federal government to be able to anonymously funnel money to the President of the United States. It's not okay for Elon Musk to have access to Department of Labor enforcement data against him or his competitors that nobody else gets access to. It's not okay to just cancel contracts that were going to Musk's competitors and substitute in his own business just because he has the ability to do it as a friend of Donald Trump. Like, the rule of law matters. Doing things by the rules matter. This level of corruption was not occurring behind the scenes prior. It is not just that the cover got pulled off of it all. And it's our decision as a body and as a country to decide not to normalize this scale of corruption. I yield the floor. Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm down here on the floor tonight, this afternoon, with my colleague, Senator Kaine from Virginia, and the ranking member of the Finance Committee, Senator Wyden, to talk about the spending and tax bill that is coming before the Congress, driven by Republicans and the Trump administration. Whether it's one bill or two bills, it doesn't really matter. It is the centerpiece of Donald Trump's economic agenda. And it's really important to talk about the impacts that this spending and tax package will have on the American public. Well, there will be some new spending for defense and some new spending on immigration policy. The heart of this spending and tax package will be familiar to many Americans because they remember it from 2017 during the first Trump administration. The heart of this Republican economic proposal is a massive tax cut for the very, very wealthy and for corporations. And this time, not borrowed to be paid back later by middle-class taxpayers, this time paid for by immediate cuts to some of the programs that regular, ordinary Americans, many frail seniors, depend on, like the Medicaid program. Just for a little bit of context, it does appear to a lot of Americans that this whole thing feels a bit like a scam. That this is a government that is being handed over to the billionaire class in order to operationalize government to make money for the very, very wealthy, and for the rest of us to pay the price. The cost of gas is going up, the cost of groceries continues to go up. And meanwhile, Donald Trump and his billionaire crowd are doing better than ever. Just a couple examples. Since Elon Musk, the richest man in the universe, has taken control of the government with Donald Trump, the value of his business has gone up by 30%. Tesla stock has gone up by 30%. And of course it has. Of course it has. Because Elon Musk is now able to get inside the government to arrange things to benefit his companies. For instance, the NLRB is gone. They fired the Democrat on the board. It is unable to muster a quorum. It's not coincidental that the NLRB had several open investigations of Tesla. Our foreign policy has been monetized to support people like Elon Musk. News just broke yesterday that Vietnam is really worried about Trump's tariff policy, and so the way that they're going to try to get some help from the Trump administration is to give some help to Elon Musk's businesses, that they're going to get Elon Musk a Starlink contract. And they believe that by doing that, they'll be able to get some help from the Trump administration on tariffs. So Elon Musk and the billionaires are able to operationalize and monetize our foreign policy. And of course, Elon Musk has access to the data, especially the data inside Treasury, that's going to help him gain an advantage on his competitors, whether he's trying to set up a new tax payment system or he's trying to set up a new universal payment capacity on Twitter. So it's not shocking that the value of Musk's business has gone way up because he now controls the federal government in a way that can benefit his business. But Trump is doing very well, too. He made $100 million off of a meme coin where we have no idea as Americans who's buying it. It is very likely foreign actors trying to influence the administration who can secretly buy the meme coin and then whisper to Donald Trump that we got your back when you needed it. $40 million from Amazon for a new documentary of the First Lady. Legal settlements from ABC News, Meta, and X, all shockingly settled with cash payments to the Trump family after the election. And the monetization of foreign policy for Donald Trump, just like the monetization of foreign policy for Elon Musk. News this week that the PGA and the Saudis were meeting with the president to try to settle their disputes, not coincidental to the fact that Donald Trump is in business with one of those golf leagues. So it just appears to many Americans like this administration puts the billionaires, the corporations, those that are loyal and friendly to Donald Trump first, and all the rest of us second. The apex of this effort to turn our government and government policy over to the billionaires is this tax cut. Again, this tax and spending package has a lot of elements to it, but the centerpiece is a tax cut that is 852 times bigger for the top 1% of earners in this country than for low-income families. That's a number that's a little hard to get your head wrapped around, so I just wanted to put it on this chart. That's what 852 times looks like. The rates go down for folks that make more than $600,000 a year, but they don't move for folks that make under $600,000 a year. I mean, they're not trying to hide what's going on here. Rates are coming down. If you make a whole ton of money, rates are staying the same if you're middle income or lower income. Another way to tell this story is that if you're in the top 1%, your average tax cut is about $70,000. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. But if you're making $30,000 a year, and there's a whole bunch of people in this country that are making $30,000 a year, especially when Republicans refuse to support the minimum wage going above $7.25 an hour. If you make $30,000 a year, you're going to get about $130. $70,000 if you're doing really, really well, $130 for everybody else. That doesn't make any sense. Why do people making $600,000 a year need $70,000? Well, only $100 goes to everybody else. The corporations are in the mix here too. They came to Congress in 2007 and said we'd need a lower tax rate. And then Trump and his Republican allies gave them a tax rate even lower than they asked. And they made this claim that all this extra money going to the corporations was going to be passed down to workers. They had a specific claim that it was going to result in $4,000 more in income to every American. Because that's how trickle-down economics works in the brains of Republicans. You give a whole bunch of money to corporations and they're going to be generous and they're going to give that money to workers in extra income. Well, we now have 8 years of experience since that first tax cut that they're looking to reauthorize. We know what happened. The studies show that it wasn't $4,000 of extra income. It wasn't $3,000. It wasn't $2,000. It wasn't $1,000. It wasn't $500. It wasn't $400. It wasn't even $200. It was zero. The tax cut resulted in an increase in salary to those people that worked for those corporations that got the big tax cut. A salary increase is zero. It's a scam. Trickle-down economics is a scam. When you put this much money into the hands of the wealthy, it does not trickle down to everybody else. When you give corporations those enormous tax cuts, it does not trickle down to everybody else. It stays in the pockets of the wealthy. The corporations use it in order to do stock buybacks, in order to inflate CEO salaries. It just separates the rich from the poor. It is a scam. It is a scam. Now, the last thing I'll say before turning it over to Senator Kaine is that this version of the giant billionaire and corporate tax cut is so much worse than the first version. It's still a tax cut for the wealthy that's 852 times bigger than for folks at the bottom of the income scale. But whereas in 2017, it was all borrowed, and that's bad, because that money has to be recouped somehow. That means that everybody eventually is going to either pay higher interest rates or have their taxes raised or their services cut to service all that debt, trillions of dollars worth of debt. This time, Republicans are contemplating not borrowing the money, but instead just taking it from poor people and middle-class people. Just taking it from them to give it to the billionaires and the corporations. The cut that they're contemplating in the House of Representatives is a cut to Medicaid. Now, they're also thinking about cuts to Medicare, your parents' primary health insurance. They're contemplating cuts to the Affordable Care Act. That's the program that insures 20 million working Americans, but they're really zeroed in on Medicaid. And they're contemplating such devastating cuts to Medicaid that it would eviscerate the program. And I mean, maybe you can say, well, I mean, Medicaid, it's for, poor people, and that's not me. Well, listen, I think that we have an obligation to try to make sure that everybody in this country, even poor children, have access to health care. But Medicaid also pays for your parents' or your neighbors' nursing home costs. If you cut the amount of money that they're talking about out of the Medicaid program, you're literally talking about nursing homes shutting down and seniors being out on the street. That's not hyperbole. That's what happens if you make these massive cuts to Medicaid. And so what they're talking about this year is not just running up a credit card bill in order to fund the tax cuts for the wealthy. They're literally talking about putting seniors out on the street in order to fund a tax cut for the wealthy. The whole thing just feels like a scam to people. The favors being given to billionaires that are inside the government, the tax cut that benefits the very, very wealthy at the expense of everybody else, the cutting of services that help regular people in order to finance the tax cut. And whether it ends up being one bill or two bills, the centerpiece is still the centerpiece. The transfer of resources and wealth from regular people, from the middle class, from poor people, to the very, very wealthy, the millionaire and billionaire class, the corporations. And so we're going to tell this story here on the Senate floor, all over the country, while this bill moves its way through the process, either as one bill or two bills. Because regardless of the process, the story is still the same, a scam. To take money from regular people to make the lives of the rich and powerful even more lavish. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, last week I spoke about the scheme of corruption by right-wing billionaires out to capture the Supreme Court. I mentioned their lawyers' blockade of our investigation into this corruption and described then how little sense their lawyers' arguments made. That brings us to this speech today. The connection is that those, in my view, nonsense lawyers' arguments badly needed propping up. And who should come to the rescue but United States Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito. Alito's actions propping up that argument caused me to write this ethics complaint against him. I ask unanimous consent that it be appended as an exhibit at the end of my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. This complaint highlights some of the Supreme Court's current legitimacy problems, which are legion. One is that the court has no procedure for an ethics complaint. I had to write to Chief Justice Roberts, both in his capacity as Chief Justice and in his capacity as chair of the Judicial Conference, because unlike in every other federal court, there is no clarity about process. The Supreme Court has no formal process for receiving or investigating such complaints, so they go there to die. Complaints about Supreme Court justices have sometimes been referred to the Judicial Conference, and there they have mostly disappeared. So it's a mess. The Supreme Court, the body with the highest responsibility to police proper procedure and fair fact-finding throughout the rest of government, has no clear and proper procedure for itself. That's weird, and that's wrong. Nothing prohibits the court or the Judicial Conference from adopting procedures to address complaints of misconduct by the justices. They just haven't bothered to. The most basic modicum of any due process is fair fact-finding, but they have no process at all to find out even what the facts are. That is simply not defensible. That has to change. And my complaint presents the court and the conference that opportunity. Now, let's move from procedure to the substance of my complaint about Justice Alito. At one level, it is an obvious slam dunk ethics violation. At another, it will take a lot more digging. Let me explain. My complaint relates to a so-called interview published on the Wall Street Journal's editorial page July 28 of this year. How it's both an interview and on the Wall Street Journal editorial page, I'm not going to explore. Justice Alito was the person interviewed. His interviewers were David Rivkin and James Taranto. And in this interview, Justice Alito offered his legal opinion that, and I'm quoting him here, no provision in the Constitution gives Congress the authority to regulate the Supreme Court, period. That's the end of his quote. Now, that comment wasn't just floating in the ether, it was related to my Supreme Court ethics bill, the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act, which the Senate Judiciary Committee had advanced just 1 week before. And it also related to an array of congressional oversight information requests from the Senate Judiciary Committee and from the Senate Finance Committee. More on that later. Back to the slam dunk part. I sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, where we hear in every Supreme Court confirmation hearing that it would be improper, that it would be wrong, even in a confirmation hearing, to express opinions on matters that might come before the court. Well, obviously, Alito's interview comments, his Wall Street Journal editorial page opining, touched on a matter that might come before the court. That's the slam dunk. Look at what other justices have testified about this opining problem. But let's start with Alito himself, who testified in his confirmation hearing that it would be, and I quote him here, improper, and I quote him again here, a disservice to the judicial process for a Supreme Court nominee to comment on issues that might come before the court. His words. Consider also Justice Thomas, who testified that such opining would, and I quote here, leave the impression that I prejudged this issue, which would be, he said, inappropriate for any judge who is worth his or her salt, end quote. Justice Kagan told the committee it would be, and I quote her, inappropriate for her to, and I quote, give any indication of how she would rule in a case, even in a somewhat veiled manner. Justice Kavanaugh testified that nominees, quoting again here, cannot discuss cases or issues that might come before them. He went on that prejudging an issue in this manner is, and I quote, inconsistent with judicial independence, rooted in Article 3. And he continued that litigants who come before the court have to know we have an open mind, that we do not have a closed mind. He quoted Justice Ginsburg, no hints, no forecasts, no previews. Justice Gorsuch went one better in his confirmation hearing. He actually testified that this no opining rule applies to discussions about Supreme Court ethics, the exact topic of Justice Alito's Wall Street Journal opining. Senator Blumenthal on the committee had asked Judge Gorsuch about proposed ethics rules for the Supreme Court and whether they would violate separation of powers. Gorsuch answered, as I say right here, as I quote, Senator, I'm afraid I just have to respectfully decline to comment on that, because I'm afraid that would be a case or controversy, and you can see how it might be. I can understand Congress's concern and interest in this area. I understand that. But I think the proper way to test that question is the prescribed process of legislation and litigation, end quote. In sum, the court itself is plainly on record that this sort of opining is wrong. So that is broken rule 1, just offering the opinion. But it gets worse. This was not just general opining out into the general ether. Alito's comments referred to a specific ongoing legal dispute. Let me explain. There are ongoing Senate investigations into the scandal of secret billionaire gifts to certain justices. The Senate Judiciary Committee is investigating reports that Supreme Court justices accepted and improperly failed to disclose in violation of Congress's disclosure laws, lavish gifts from billionaire benefactors seeking to influence the court. And the Senate Finance Committee is investigating federal tax compliance regarding those undisclosed gifts. Were tax laws broken? Were proper declarations made? In those congressional investigations, requests for information have been sent out. In response to those requests, objections have been raised. And here's where Alito comes in. The objections by the billionaire's lawyers assert that Congress has no constitutional authority to legislate in this area, hence no authority to investigate. They assert, in my view, plainly wrongly, that our constitutional separation of powers blocks any congressional action in this area, which in turn, they assert, also plainly wrongly, in my view, blocks any congressional investigation. Set aside the demerits of that argument, for which I refer you to the lawyers' letters I added to the record in my previous speech and my own takedown of that argument. Sound or unsound, the point is, it is their argument in that ongoing dispute. And in that ongoing dispute, Justice Alito's Wall Street Journal comments prop up that argument. The language is nearly identical. You can compare it for yourself. In fact, lawyers for some of the billionaires to whom we have sent information requests have actually quoted Justice Alito's comment in declining to respond. So this is not just some improper general opining. It's a Supreme Court justice leaning into one side of a specific ongoing dispute and being used and quoted by one side of a specific ongoing dispute. That's pretty bad. It gets worse. One of the interviewers in that Wall Street Journal interview, attorney David Rivkin, wasn't just some interviewer. He is the attorney for a party in that specific ongoing dispute. Rivkin is the attorney making the precise legal argument that Alito echoed, and he is making it in that ongoing dispute. None of this, of course, was disclosed in the so-called interview. A logical mind would rightfully ask whether Justice Alito opined on this matter at the behest of his interviewer, attorney Rivkin. A suspicious mind would even wonder whether attorney Rivkin prepped his witness, as lawyers are wont to do. With no means of fact-finding, all this remains unknown. Bad enough to opine on some general matter that may come before the court, worse when the opining brings a Supreme Court justice's influence to bear in a specific ongoing legal dispute, and worse yet, when the influence of the justice might have been summoned by counsel to a party in that dispute. The timeline is suspicious. Mr. Rivkin's interview with Justice Alito was reportedly conducted in early July 2023, Well, on July 11th, Chairman Durbin and I had sent a letter to Rifkin's client in that dispute, inquiring about undisclosed gifts and travel provided to justices. On July 20, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance my judicial ethics bill. And, by the way, the Rifkin-Alito Congress has no authority argument fared very poorly that day in the committee. On July 25th, Mr. Rifkin, by letter, refused to answer our information requests on the purported ground that, and I'm quoting him here, any attempt by Congress to enact ethics standards for the Supreme Court would falter on constitutional objections. And 3 days later, on July 28th, comes the supportive opining from Justice Alito about those constitutional objections. There are a lot of questions that need answering under oath about how this mess played out. But wait, there's more. Attorney Rifkin's client in that dispute has a relationship with Justice Alito. He is a friend, an ally of Justice Alito. Rifkin's client is Leonard Leo. Leo is not just a friend and ally of Alito. Our oversight questions that Attorney Rifkin is blocking relate to Mr. Leo's actions to facilitate gifts for Supreme Court justices from right-wing billionaires of free and undisclosed transportation and lodging. Mr. Leo didn't just facilitate, he was Justice Alito's companion on the luxurious Alaskan fishing trip in 2008 that right-wing billionaires funded. The relationship goes back. Leo's political organization, and I quote here, had run an advertising campaign supporting Alito in his confirmation fight, and Leo was reportedly part of the team that prepared Alito for his Senate hearings. So, it appears that Justice Alito, A, improperly opined in the Wall Street Journal, B, to influence a specific ongoing dispute, C, possibly at the behest of counsel in that dispute, and D, to the benefit of a personal friend and ally. None of that was disclosed in the interview either. And it brings us to the last and most damning point. Justice Alito's opining, potentially at the behest of his friend and ally's lawyer, props up an argument being used to block inquiry into undisclosed gifts and travel received by Justice Alito himself. Justice Alito himself is the ultimate beneficiary of his own improper opining. It comes full circle. In the worst case scenario, Justice Alito broke the rules against opining in order to facilitate an organized campaign to obstruct congressional investigation into tens of thousands of dollars in gifts he, Alito, personally received and doesn't want investigated. Whether Justice Alito was unwittingly used to provide fodder for such interference or intentionally participated in that interference plan, and whether he did it to protect the right-wing billionaires or himself or both, those are questions whose answers require additional facts. The heart of any due process is a fair determination of the facts. Uniquely, in the whole of government, the Supreme Court has insulated its justice from any semblance of fair fact-finding. The obstruction of our inquiries by Mr. Rivkin and Mr. Leo, fueled by Justice Alito's opining, prevents Congress from gathering those facts. And the Supreme Court won't even look. Mr. President, that can't be. Not in a nation of laws. That is flagrantly, obviously wrong. So I have asked the Chief Justice or the Judicial Conference to take whatever steps are necessary to develop a process to investigate this affair and provide the public with the prompt and trustworthy answers it deserves. The Supreme Court's legitimacy cannot stand on an edifice of obstruction, secrecy, and lies. To be continued, Mr. President. I yield the floor.